Hi, good morning everybody. My name is Nash and I'm from Group 26. And in this video, I will demonstrate how to perform daily range of motion exercises on your patient. Hi, good morning Ms. Amira. My name is Nash and I'll be the nurse in charge for you. And today we'll be performing our daily range of motion exercises. So before we begin, I have a question to ask. Do you have any pain? And are you ready to proceed with our procedure?
I'm ready.
Alright, so we'll begin with the shoulder exercises. So we'll make sure that the arm is straight. Hold, support the patient's arm. And we'll begin with flexion of the shoulder. Flexion, extension. Flexion, extension. Flexion, and extension. And now we will perform abduction and adduction of the shoulder. Abduction, adduction. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. Now we will be performing outer and inward rotation. So make sure that the patient's arm is 90 degrees straight and then push it all the way up here. So we'll start with outward rotation, inward rotation. Outward rotation, inward rotation, outward rotation, and inward rotation. After we finish with shoulder exercises, we will continue with the elbow exercises. So make sure that the patient's palm is facing towards upwards, and then we'll begin with flexion of the shoulder. Flexion of the elbow, Flexion, extension. Flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. Now we'll continue with pronation and supination of the patient's shoulder. Supination, pronation, supination, pronation, supination, pronation. After we finish elbow exercises, we will continue with the wrist exercises. So first, make sure that the patient's hands are straight. And we will perform with the flexion of the wrist. Flexion, extension, hyperextension. Flexion, flexion, extension, hyperextension. Flexion, extension, hyperextension. We'll also do it on this side. Radial, extension, ulnar flexion. Radial 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 extension, ulnar extension. We'll then continue with the exercise of the thumb. Abduction, adduction. Abduction, adduction. Abduction, adduction. Afterwards will be flexion, flexion, extension. Flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. We will then touch the tips of the thumb with the tips of the fingers. And now we can continue with the exercise of the fingers. Abduction, adduction. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction. We will proceed with the next fingers. Finally, the pinky finger. And now we can do flexion of the fingers. Flexion, extension. Flexion, extension. Flexion, extension. And now we can proceed the exercise with the legs. Now we will begin with the leg exercises. So with the back blanket, I will only expose one leg, which we will perform our exercises. So we'll begin with the hip exercises. Support the patient's leg and begin performing flexion of the hips. Flexion and extension. Flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. And now we perform abduction and adduction. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, and adduction. Afterwards, we'll perform inward rotation, outward rotation, inward rotation, outward rotation, and inward rotation, outward rotation. And now we perform knee exercises. So raise the patient's legs again, perform flexion and extension, flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. Now, after we finish hips and knee, we will continue with the ankle exercises. Dorsal flexion, plantar flexion, dorsal flexion, plantar flexion, dorsal flexion, plantar flexion, inward rotation, outward rotation, inward rotation, outward rotation, inward rotation, and outward rotation. And now we begin exercising the toes. Abduction, adduction, abduction, adduction, abduction, and adduction. Continue the same procedure on the rest of the toes. And now we begin flexion exercises. Flexion, extension, flexion, extension, flexion, and extension. Alright, now we have finished. Continue with the same steps on the other side of the patient's body.